by Gloria Whelan. Buenos Aires, 1977. Sylvia. Eduardo, it happened hours ago, but I relive it again and again. All the lights in our neighborhood went out. I thought nothing of it, for I had read that the workers in the electric plants were staging blackouts because of a wage cut. You, dear brother, understood at once. You had heard stories from others. The whole neighborhood was darkened so no one could see which house the military police broke into. It was ours. We were all together. Father had just returned from a late night at the hospital and was telling us of an interesting patient. This man is so rigid and stiff he can no longer sit or walk. A tragic but fascinating case. I'm writing it up for the journal. Mother was listening carefully. Perhaps she was wondering how she could use the strange disease in a poem. Her poems are quilts of the pieces of our lives, turned every which way so that we seem to be both ourselves and people we do not know. I sat next to you on the couch, my legs curled cozily under me, relieved that for once we were all together with no arguments. At the first pounding, your red setter, Dichoso, barked wildly and threw himself at the door. Father gathered us around him. They forced the door open, giving Dichoso a brutal kick. Men wearing army uniforms and masks stormed into the house, making it their own. They placed a hood over your face, handcuffed you, and carried you away, pushing aside Father as he pleaded to go in your place. Mother grasped my hand so tightly I winced. She held on to me as she wanted to hold on to you, Eduardo, and could not. More masked men swarmed over the house, turning everything upside down. They emptied your room, carrying away your beloved books. One of the soldiers purposely brushed against me, leering. Then they were gone. The house had never felt so empty. Dear Eduardo, dear brother, how is it that you and I argued so much? That is the terrible, wonderful thing about how much we love each other. Everything matters and everything can hurt. I can't send these letters to you, but if I write them in my heart, I know that wherever they have taken you, you will hear them. Our country is at war with itself. Argentina has become a battlefield, a country of death and of mourners. Just as we are brother and sister, Eduardo, and our quarrels tear at our hearts, so our people fight one another to the death. It is the cruelest kind of war. Do you remember how happy we once were? How you and I shared the city? We were porteños, people of the port. The parks, decorated with their pink and purple bougainvillea blossoms, were our play yard. Do you remember our first visit to the zoo? I was no larger than the penguins. We fell in love with the white tiger, a pale ghost of an animal. When the lions roared, we laughed. Nothing frightened us, for danger was safely caged. That was how we looked at the world then, believing nothing evil could reach us. Mother took us to the Teatro Colón to see all the operas. We saw misery and murder on the stage, all dressed up in fine costumes, but when the curtain came down, the misery and murder disappeared. We went happily home whistling the tunes. On Sundays, we would walk with our parents among the trees and tombstones of Recoleta. It was not so much a cemetery as a park. As we walked along the narrow avenues, we were never frightened, for the tomb's great marble angels watched over us. We went with Father to the planetario and looked up at the stars, the Southern Cross and the False Cross. Father pointed to the constellation of the Phoenix. The phoenix, he said, was a bird of the greatest possible beauty. Every 500 years the bird was consumed by the burning rays of the sun, only to rise once again. The magnificent bird could not be destroyed. This is our country of Argentina, Father said. There have been terrible times, and such times may come again, but Argentina will survive. Then the guerrillas came, and the generals after them, snatching away our childhood and destroying our home. Your arguments with Father began the day the military police came to his hospital. It was a warm spring day. You and I were sitting with Mother on the terrace. After Mother complained about the neighbor's cat stalking our birds, you chased it out of our yard with a broom. I was reading an English spy story that had just been translated into Spanish. On the table was a pitcher of iced tea and a bowl of strawberries. We all looked up, surprised at hearing Father's car pull into the garage in the middle of the day. He walked out onto the terrace and sank into a chair as if he had been walking for miles. "What is it, Arturo?" Mother asked. "They came to the hospital today," Father said. "Who came?" "You asked, Eduardo, but from your expression I knew you had already guessed." "The police?" ? "Yes," Father said, "the police. They took away Jacobo Solanas, the doctor that heads up our psychiatric service." "Why?" Mother asked, her voice incredulous. "I've met Jacobo at parties with you. There's not a political bone in his body." "The generals have the idea that Solana's patients have confided secrets to him, and secrets are dangerous. They're taking him in for questioning. They want to see if those secrets are a danger to the state. I know Solanas. He will not give away what his patients have told him in confidence. He will end up in prison." You were furious, Eduardo, and demanded of Father, "What are you going to do about it?" "I can do nothing. I'm a doctor and not a politician," you asked. "Why don't you protest? How could you let them take Dr. Solanas away? How would it help my patients if I were put in jail? And what would it mean for you and your mother and Sylvia to have a father shut away in prison?" You lashed out at Father. "Do you think I would care about that? The important thing is to fight against the generals who are taking away our freedom." Mother said, "Think what you're saying, Eduardo. You would have your father throw himself into the lion's den?" Father said, "Eduardo, you're being an impetuous fool. I've taken an oath to heal the sick, and that's exactly what I will do. I will not be drawn into this political nightmare." You would not be silenced. "I don't see how you can turn your back on Dr. Solanas. If you and the other medical faculty don't do something, who will speak out for him? I'll go to the hospital myself tomorrow. I can get some of my friends to demonstrate." "You will do nothing of the kind. This is not a time for heroics. In this country, all the heroes end up dead." Mother fled to her study to write a poem. She puts all her fear and anger into her poems, but she no longer publishes them. Alma, the editor of her poetry magazine, has disappeared. Now Mother can only write her poems of protest on thick paper, each word cutting into the paper like a knife. She locks the dangerous poems away in her desk so that you can almost hear the imprisoned words screaming to be let out. "What good will a poem do, Dr. Solanas?" you demanded. "No one will see it. The generals are sure to close down any magazine that would dare to print it." Father had the last word. "You will stay out of this matter, Eduardo. One ill-considered word can lock you away for a lifetime or worse. Just do what I'll do. Keep very quiet." I was terrified. Like everyone else, I had heard stories of arrests and disappearances. Now it was happening in Father's own hospital. What if it happened to Father? I wasn't brave or brash like you, Eduardo. I believed if we were quiet and did nothing, we would all be safe. I decided to pretend the nightmares were not happening. I would be the little mouse and make myself small so the cat would not find me. I made a different world for myself with my friends, Rosa and Isabella. We three were inseparable, keeping close and pretending there was nothing wrong, that the frightening tales told in whispers were all in people's imagination. After school, we rode Palermo Viejo's bike paths. We window shopped on Florida Street for jeans and shoes with heels so high we could hardly walk on them. We went to the heladerias to munch on double chocolate cones sprinkled with granizados. And then, the next day, knowing how fattening the ice cream was, we would go to the Café Tortoni, eating nothing, only drinking black coffee. Afterwards, we would weaken and end up with a poncho or an empanada from one of the kioscos. We put on our party dresses and had tea at the Alvear Palace Hotel, pretending we were sophisticated and elegant. We sneaked out of our houses to go to the discos and danced until it was light and time to get ready for our classes. It was at a disco that I first met Norberto. He insisted on dancing every dance with me. He glared at any boy who tried to cut in. He was tall, with slicked back brown hair and cold blue eyes. He watched me in a way that made me want to close the top button of my blouse. But he was an excellent dancer. "Tell me the name of your favorite song," he said. "I'll get the band to play it." "He Will Break Your Heart," I said. I was just getting over Alfonso from school, but I didn't tell Norberto that. Norberto went over to the band leader, and I saw him give the man a lot of money. They played the song, and then he asked them to play Paul McCartney's song, And I Love Her. "That's for you, beautiful," he said. I had never had a band play a song I wanted. It made me feel important, as if I could pick out anything in the world and Norberto would give it to me. Isabella had been watching us. She took me aside and whispered, "That boy you are dancing with is Norberto Lopez. He is the son of General Lopez, the general who shut down the university paper and arrested the professors." I couldn't believe her. Norberto just seemed like a boy interested in having a good time. "Are you sure?" "Of course I'm sure. He's at the university with my brother. Norberto is always reminding people of how high up in the government his father is, and how they have expensive cars and a vacation home in Tigre. Everyone dislikes him, but they're afraid to show it. They don't want him running to his father with their names. I would never dance with him, and neither should you." I had no idea. That's revolting. Watch me get rid of him. I made excuses not to dance with Norberto, careful not to make him angry. I promised my girlfriends I'd go home with them. I told him, "It's been lots of fun." "Give me your phone number," he demanded. My parents don't approve of phone calls from boys. They'd be upset. "I promise I'll be back soon." I hurried out of the disco with Isabella and Rosa, feeling as if I had escaped dark woods where dangerous animals lurked. I knew little of politics, but I had heard you, Eduardo, speak of General Lopez's cruelty. He might even have been the one to arrest Professor Bustamante, who was your favorite. I remembered how upset you were when the professor disappeared, and I shivered with disgust to think that I had been dancing with Lopez's son. I was careful to say nothing to you about my evening with Norberto. After that, I kept away from the disco. I saw the way you disapproved of me, Eduardo. Sylvia, how can you know so little of what's going on right under your own nose? How can you be so frivolous? Don't you care about what's happening to our country? I didn't want to think about the things that were happening. Of course I care, but what good does it do to protest? The generals have all the power. It would only get us into trouble, Eduardo. Father is right. We should go on with our lives. Next year I'll be at the university and there will be nothing but work. I want to have fun my last free year. I kept on trying to ignore what was happening. On Sundays, after Mass, Rosa and Isabella and I would go to the Feria San Telmo and browse the booths, searching for vintage clothing, long velvet skirts, and little hats with veils. On sunny days, we would go to the park and wander under the ancient magnolia trees so old they had forgotten how to bloom. All the while, Eduardo, I watched you draw away from our family and become more and more involved with meetings and demonstrations. I was frightened for you. Our country had a name for the prisoners who were arrested and never seen again. They were called Los Desaparecidos, the disappeared. You would not let people forget those who had vanished. You marched with the unions the generals had tried to close down and demonstrated in front of the newspaper where the editors had been arrested. You went into the barrios to take food to the hungry and find homes for the children whose parents had disappeared. Mother had to get a special shampoo when you came home with lice. You didn't care. You laughed and said, "I share everything." "Eduardo," I pleaded, "you must give it up or they will come for you. Rosa told me students at the university are arrested just for belonging to a school organization, and they are never seen again." You would not be intimidated. A week later, Isabella said she saw you standing on the steps of the university handing out flyers about the students' disappearance. Father was furious. He jumped up from the dining room table and shouted at you, "Eduardo, you are putting all of us in danger." Your mother, your sister, and me, stop this. You have no power over those savages, but believe me, they have power over you. Only be a little patient. The generals won't be there forever. He who lives by the sword perishes by the sword. How many must die, you demanded, waiting for that day to come? Eduardo, Mother cried. You are a holy fool. I admire what you are doing, but it is suicide. How will you be able to help if they take you away? At least be more discreet. Do what you must do secretly. Don't flaunt your deeds in their faces. Father scolded Mother. What kind of advice is that? They know everything. Knowing secrets is the general's business. Each evening I was terrified that you would not come home. Father would hold his medical journal in his hands, but forget to turn the pages. Mother would sit with her pen suspended in the air. We'd wait. Finally, Dichosa would bark and scratch at the front door, tail thumping. You would come into the house and we would breathe again. At last you seemed to listen. You began to come home after your classes at the university instead of staying to demonstrate. I haven't seen your friends, Caesar and Maria, I said. They don't stop by the house for you so that the three of you can go off on some secret mission. You had no answer. You were restless and cross with me, but I said nothing, thinking that you missed your friends and were ashamed not to be supporting them. I was grateful and relieved that you had stopped your dangerous activities, and I gladly put up with the irritability. Then the police came for you, and I realized you hadn't stopped at all. After they took you away, Father rushed out to talk with lawyers. He knew better than to go to the police. I helped Mother into the kitchen and made her sit down at the table while I put water on for tea. As I filled Mother's cup, I was trembling so hard, I splashed boiling water on my hand. I didn't even feel it. I was like a small animal, threatened into a kind of shock, feeling nothing. Mother and I sat in our living room, which had never seemed so empty, our hands clasped, hanging on to each other. I looked into myself and found a tiny bit of courage I had no idea was there. I was furious with the police for taking you. I thought of them breaking into the homes of those who fought with you. I knew what I must do. I made some excuse to Mother and hurried into Father's study. I picked up the phone to warn your two closest friends. Caesar thanked me and hurriedly put down the receiver. When I called Maria's house, a strange voice answered. "Who is this?" he asked. "Who's there?" I was too late. Maria was chupada, swallowed up by the military. Eduardo, do you remember the summer you were 8? We had all gone swimming. Father ordered you to jump into the deep end of the pool instead of going down the steps. You stood there terrified, looking down at the circle of blue water, afraid that if you jumped, the water would wrap its arms about you, hold you, smother you. Father called you a baby. I saw him stride across the lawn, meaning to push you in. I was only 6 and playing in the shallow water. I couldn't swim, but I forgot my own fears. I thought only of yours. I paddled into the deep water, nearly drowning. In rescuing me, Father forgot all about you. Eduardo, I risked my life to save you that day, and I will risk it to save you now.